I'm getting messages on places like Twitter, of course, with people saying things like, but if you read the bill, if you read what they're trying to do, what's wrong with that? And my response to them has been, but that's not an accurate translation. And the response back has been, well, be that the case or not, what's wrong with everyone being equal as actors trying to do? So maybe you could address for me and for the people in my incredibly healthy Twitter feed, not toxic at all, the idea of how important it is to have an accurate translation before we even get to, is this a good piece of legislation to implement?
Yeah, kia ora. Yeah, so what you showed is the proposed treaty principles, which ACT campaigned on, and the ones they're promoting for inclusion in the bill. So we haven't actually seen the bill yet, but we were sufficiently concerned at the inaccuracies in the proposed principles to speak out now. And the issue here is that David Seymour and ACT Party have repeatedly stated that these proposed principles are what the Māori text of Te Tiriti actually says. And so that is the premise for these proposed principles, that they're based on what Te Tiriti actually says. And so that, of course, comes down to looking at the Māori text of Te Tiriti and seeing if that's actually what it says. So what we found when we did that is that the Māori text that you see in those proposed principles you put up, those partial phrases are extracted from the Māori text of Te Tiriti. They're taken out of context, and then that includes linguistic context, and they would have a different meaning, or actually a coherent meaning in that linguistic context, because these partial phrases don't even make sense on their own in Te Reo Māori. So they've been taken out of linguistic context, which gives them meaning, but also cultural and historical context. And so when you're doing translation, it's critically important, and a really core ethical standard is that you translate with regard to the actual and intended meaning of the text, and that you do that with regards to and in the context, all those different contexts that I've outlined. So that's been breached in the English principles that have been reached here, and also by the taking of the Māori phrases out of context. So our statement is that none of these proposed principles are truly present in the Māori text of Te Tiriti, and they're also not present in the English text of the treaty. But they've claimed to be taken from the Māori text, and what's happened is that they've taken a very small number of words, so 35 out of 170 words from the 3 articles of the Māori text of Te Tiriti, and then left things out, obviously, taking just that small number of words, added things in, and distorted the meaning. And so we come to this set of principles, which are claim to be what Te Tiriti actually says, and they're not. And so as translators, we can see that, and we're not the first to say that. Many Māori speakers and treaty experts have been saying that. But as translators, we have ethical standards to follow and processes that we follow. And so we've applied those processes. And for example, one is to back translate and find out to see if it actually goes back when you translate it back into Māori, to see that the concepts are still the same. And
like reverse engineering it from what they're saying to see what it would be.
Yeah. So if you translate something from Māori to English, you then back translate it into Māori to review and see if you've retained the very subtleties of meaning, which is so critical. And that's why we're speaking as translators, because around the world, the use of language in translation is key for transparency and integrity. And, you wouldn't want New Zealand to be taking out the key principles of a trade agreement with China that was in Chinese without involving Chinese interpreters and translators. And so that's a really basic standard that, government departments do follow good standards generally for translation, and involve licensed translators and peer review and quality assurance processes that are really strong. And that's for good reason. You need things to say what they were intended to say when they appear in different languages. And it doesn't seem that those processes have been followed here. And so for legislation, uh, it should absolutely be followed. That should be an even stronger process than for normal translations, and especially legislation which seeks to, change, it would change the meaning of over 50 laws and potentially also our constitutional arrangements. So it's very important and significant piece of legislation, and it needs to have a foundation of absolute truth and rigorous quality control.